I never thought a simple weekend getaway would turn into something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I was looking for peace and quiet, somewhere to disconnect and gather my thoughts. A small cabin in the woods seemed like the perfect choice. It was far enough from the city to feel like an escape, but still close enough for an easy drive. The description online made it sound idyllic, secluded, rustic, and surrounded by nature. No neighbors, no distractions, just me, the trees, and the silence. When I arrived, the place looked just like the pictures. A small wooden cabin with a stone fireplace, a few old pieces of furniture, and a view of the forest stretching out behind it. It felt cozy, almost charming, with the soft light from the setting sun pouring through the trees. I unpacked my bags, put some music on, and settled in. The peace was immediate, and I could already feel the tension in my shoulders start to melt away. The first night was peaceful. I stayed up late reading a book, the crackling of the fire providing a gentle background noise. But as the hours passed and the world outside grew darker, I started to notice how quiet it was. Too quiet. There was no rustling of animals, no distant sounds of wind moving through the trees, just silence. I told myself it was normal for a place so isolated, but a small part of me felt uneasy. I tried to ignore it and went to bed. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but as I lay there in the dark, it became more distinct. Someone was moving outside. I could hear the crunch of leaves underfoot, a slow, deliberate pace. My heart started to race. It was too late for anyone to be out there, especially in such a remote area. I pushed the thought out of my mind and tried to convince myself it was just an animal or the wind, but the sound didn't stop. Continued, and I realized it was too consistent, too human. I grabbed the flashlight from the bedside table and crept to the window. I could barely make out the shapes of trees, but I didn't see anyone. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought. I closed the curtain and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The feeling of being watched lingered long after I turned off the light. The next morning, I decided to go out for a hike, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. I explored the woods around the cabin, but the nagging feeling that someone was watching me never left. As I walked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. The trees seemed to grow thicker, the shadows darker. I thought I heard footsteps behind me a few times, but when I turned around, no one was there. That afternoon, I decided to call it a day and return to the cabin. I was starting to feel like maybe I wasn't as alone as I had hoped. When I got back, I noticed something strange. The front door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it before I left. My stomach dropped. I cautiously pushed it open, half expecting to find someone inside, but the cabin was empty. Still, the unease lingered, like a cold hand at the back of my neck. I locked the door and double-checked the windows before sitting down on the couch. As the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the door being open. It was the strange sensation that I was being watched, even when I was alone. I kept the lights on and the TV blaring, anything to drown out the silence. That night, the feeling of being watched grew even stronger. I could hear footsteps again, this time closer, almost right outside the door. My heart raced as I tried to ignore it, but the sound grew louder, more urgent. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I cursed under my breath, feeling more isolated than ever. I was alone, in a cabin miles from anyone, with no way to reach out for help. The footsteps stopped, but the air felt heavy, thick with tension. I waited, holding my breath, hoping that whatever was out there would leave. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone knocking on the door. Soft at first, then harder, faster. My mind raced and panic set in. Who would be knocking at this hour? Who even knew I was here? I slowly crept toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peeked through the peephole, but all I saw was darkness. No figure, no movement, just an empty night. I waited, terrified to open the door, but after what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. For the next few hours, I stayed awake, every little sound making me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the isolation getting to me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I decided to leave. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things, trying to ignore the creeping sense of dread that hung over me. As I was loading the car, I noticed something strange on the ground near the cabin. A trail of footprints leading from the woods toward the front door. The prints were fresh, and they didn't belong to any animal I could identify. They were too large, too deliberate. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what I had been too afraid to admit. Someone had been here, watching me, maybe even the night before. I quickly got into my car and drove off, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't look back. I didn't care if I had left anything behind. I just wanted to get as far away from that cabin as possible. As I drove away, I thought about the strange events, the footsteps, the knocking, the feeling of being watched. I didn't know who or what had been out there, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. The woods had swallowed my peace, and I wasn't going to risk it again. I made it back to the city, finally feeling like I could breathe again. But the memories stayed with me. The feeling of someone lurking just beyond my vision. The cold, the silence that was never truly quiet. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I had been isolated too long, too far from civilization. But every now and then, I still hear the sound of footsteps behind me in the quiet of the night. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I hear knocking on my door again. I didn't plan to end up in the cabin. It wasn't like I chose it out of some sense of adventure or romanticized idea of roughing it in the wild. I was homeless, broke, and desperate. It wasn't even a proper cabin. Really, more of a shack that had been neglected for decades, tucked away in the woods like it had been forgotten by the world. That's exactly what I was looking for. A place to be invisible. I stumbled on it by accident. It was late October, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones when you don't have proper clothes or a warm place to stay. I'd been walking for hours after being told to leave the last bus station I tried to hunker down in. The woods weren't my first choice, but when you have no money and no one to turn to, options are slim. The cabin came into view just before sunset. At first, I thought it was some old hunter's outpost or a storage shed, but as I got closer, I saw the outline of a door and what used to be windows. The glass was long gone, replaced with mismatched boards nailed haphazardly into place. The roof sagged on one side, but it was still there, and that was all that mattered. Shelter. I hesitated before stepping inside. You learn to be cautious when you're living on the margins. You don't just walk into strange places without looking around first. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, really. No birds, no rustling leaves. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of dead leaves underfoot. I picked up a branch, just in case, and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, like it had been trapped there for years. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung from the corners like forgotten decorations. There was a single room with a rickety table, a broken chair, and a pile of old newspapers in one corner. Someone had been there before me, though not recently. Empty cans and bottles littered the floor, and a tattered blanket lay in a heap by the wall. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That first night was the hardest. I used the blanket even though it smelled like mildew and something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't warm, but it was better than nothing. I tried to sleep on the floor, but the cold seeped through my clothes and into my skin. Every sound outside felt amplified in the stillness. The creak of the trees, the occasional snap of a branch, the wind whistling through the gaps in the walls. I didn't sleep much, but I made it through the night. That was all that mattered. The days blurred together after that. I fell into a rhythm of sorts. During the day, I scavenged for food. Wild berries, mushrooms, anything I could find that wouldn't kill me. Sometimes I'd get lucky and stumble across a trash bin in a nearby town or something edible left behind by hikers. Other days, I went hungry. The cabin became my home base, though I never felt at home there. It was just a place to exist. As the weeks went on, I started to notice things about the cabin. Small things at first, like the way the floor creaked in certain spots or how the light filtered through the cracks in the walls in the morning. But then there were other things that didn't make sense. One morning, I woke up to find the blanket folded neatly at the foot of the wall where I'd left it. I was sure I hadn't done that. Another time, I found fresh scratches on the inside of the door, like something had tried to claw its way out. I told myself it was just my imagination or maybe animals. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The worst part was the smell. It came and went, always faint but unmistakable. Rot, damp earth, and something metallic. I searched the cabin from top to bottom, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. No dead animals, no moldy food, nothing that could explain it. Winter hit hard. The cold was relentless, and the snow made it nearly impossible to leave the cabin for more than an hour or two at a time. I scavenged what I could, but my body was starting to feel the strain. My clothes were thin, my boots worn through at the soles. Hunger gnawed at me constantly, and every night felt like a battle to stay alive. One night, when the wind was howling outside and I could see my breath in the air, I heard it. A faint tapping, like someone knocking on the walls from the outside. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe tree branches swaying in the storm, but it was too deliberate, too rhythmic.
Top, top,
Pause.
top.
I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The tapping moved, starting at one wall and then circling the cabin. I couldn't see anything through the cracks, but I could feel it. Something or someone was out there. I didn't sleep that night. By spring, I was a shell of who I'd been. Thin, dirty, and constantly on edge. The cabin wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a prison. But I didn't leave. Couldn't. Something about the place had its hooks in me, and every time I thought about leaving, a wave of dread washed over me. One day, while scavenging in the woods, I found it. An old, rusted trapdoor hidden under a pile of leaves. It was less than 50 feet from the cabin, and I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. My heart pounded as I pried it open, the hinges squealing in protest. A narrow staircase led down into darkness. I didn't go down right away. I told myself I needed to prepare, to gather a flashlight or a candle. But the truth was, I was terrified. Whatever was down there, I knew it wasn't good. It took me 2 days to work up the courage to go back. The air was damp and cold as I descended, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. The flashlight beam flickered, casting long shadows on the dirt walls. At the bottom was a small room, no bigger than the cabin itself. What I found there still haunts me. Chains bolted to the walls, a stained mattress on the floor, and a collection of old, rusted tools laid out on a table. The smell hit me like a punch to the gut. Rot and decay. But the worst part was the writing on the walls. Words and phrases carved into the dirt, some in English, others in a language I didn't recognize. I ran. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever had happened in that cabin, whatever had been done, it wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. I packed what little I had and left before nightfall, not stopping until I was miles away. It took weeks to feel normal again, if you could call it that. I eventually found work and a place to stay, but the cabin stayed with me. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I still hear the tapping. but I survived, and that's all that matters. I've been hunting for years, and I've always found peace in the quiet solitude of the woods. It's the one place where I can think clearly, away from the noise and distractions of everyday life. The cabin, nestled deep in the heart of the forest, is my retreat. It's small but sturdy, with a single room and a stone fireplace that keeps me warm during the cold nights. I built it myself a few years back with the help of an old friend, and it's been my safe haven ever since. The forest around the cabin is dense, filled with towering pines and oaks. There's a stream about a mile east where I sometimes fish, and the area is teeming with deer, rabbits, and other wildlife. It's perfect for hunting, and I've spent countless weekends here, alone with my thoughts and my rifle. It was late autumn when it happened, just before the first snow. The days were short, and the nights came quickly, blanketing the forest in darkness. I had arrived at the cabin the evening before, unloaded my gear, and prepared for a weekend of hunting. The air was crisp, and the forest was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant calls of animals. The first day passed uneventfully. I tracked a few deer but didn't take a shot. I was saving my energy for the next morning when the light would be better. That night, I sat by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the simple meal I'd prepared. I slept soundly, the kind of deep sleep that only comes from being out in nature. The next day, I woke before dawn. The sky was just beginning to lighten as I stepped outside with my rifle slung over my shoulder. The air was colder than I expected, and my breath formed clouds as I exhaled. I decided to head toward the east, near the stream. It was a familiar path, one I had walked dozens of times before. As I walked, the forest seemed different. The usual sounds of birds and small animals were muted, almost absent. It was eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I told myself it was just the early hour, that the animals were still waking up, but the unease lingered. I reached the stream and found a good spot to sit and wait. The water was running low, and the ground around it was muddy, perfect for spotting tracks. Sure enough, I saw fresh deer prints leading into the trees. I followed them cautiously, stepping lightly to avoid making too much noise. About an hour passed as I tracked the deer. I moved slowly, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound to my left. I froze, gripping my rifle tightly. The sound was faint but distinct, like something moving through the underbrush. I turned slowly, raising my rifle. My heart was pounding, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. But when I looked, I didn't see a deer. Instead, I saw something I couldn't quite make sense of. It was about 30 yards away, partially hidden behind a tree. At first, I thought it was a large animal, maybe a bear or a moose, but the shape was all wrong. It was hunched over, with long limbs that seemed too thin for its body. Its skin was a mottled gray, almost like tree bark, and its head was oddly shaped, with no visible ears. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was looking at. The creature moved slightly, and I saw its eyes. They were large and dark, reflecting the faint light filtering through the trees. It was staring directly at me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring back at it. Time seemed to stretch. My instincts told me to run, but I didn't want to make any sudden movements. Slowly, I began to back away, keeping my eyes on the creature. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze following me. As I backed away, I stepped on a branch, and the snap echoed through the silent forest. The creature reacted instantly. It let out a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine, then started moving toward me. Its movements were jerky, almost unnatural, but it was fast. Panic set in, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back, but I could hear it behind me, crashing through the underbrush. My only thought was to get back to the cabin. I knew the forest well, and I hoped that my familiarity with the terrain would give me an advantage. The run felt endless. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but I didn't dare slow down. The creature's sounds grew fainter, and I began to think I might have lost it. Finally, I saw the cabin through the trees. I sprinted the last stretch and slammed the door behind me, bolting it shut. Inside the cabin, I grabbed my shotgun and loaded it, my hands shaking. I checked the windows, making sure they were secure, and stoked the fire to keep the room lit. For hours, I sat there, listening for any sign of the creature. The forest outside was silent, but the silence was oppressive, heavy with tension. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of something scratching at the cabin door. My heart raced as I grabbed my shotgun and aimed it at the door. The scratching stopped, and I heard a low growl. It sounded like it was right outside. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After what felt like an eternity, the sound stopped. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, my eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the creature to return. When morning finally came, I stepped outside cautiously, shotgun in hand. The forest was calm, the sunlight filtering through the trees. There was no sign of the creature, but I found tracks near the cabin. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, elongated and with deep grooves, as if the creature had claws. I didn't waste any time. I packed up my gear and left the cabin, making my way back to my truck as quickly as possible. The unease stayed with me the entire drive home. I haven't been back to the cabin since. It's been months, but I still think about that day, replaying it over and over in my mind. I've tried to rationalize what I saw, telling myself it was just a strange animal or a trick of the light, but deep down, I know it wasn't. The cabin is still there, standing empty in the woods, but I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to return. Whatever I saw that day, it wasn't something I was meant to understand, and maybe that's for the best. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, just me and the quiet cabin tucked away in the woods. My aunt had invited me to spend a couple of days there, a small escape from the noise of the city. The cabin had been in the family for years, and I had always enjoyed the simplicity of it. Nestled deep in the forest, it was far enough from civilization to feel completely isolated, yet not so far that I couldn't make a quick escape if needed. When I arrived, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting a warm orange glow across the landscape. I unpacked my things, settled into the cabin, and then stepped out onto the porch to take in the fresh, crisp air. There were no neighbors, no other houses for miles, just trees and the occasional bird chirping. It felt like the perfect place to recharge. The inside of the cabin was just as I remembered. Wooden beams crisscrossed the ceiling, and the scent of pine mixed with the faint, earthy smell of aged wood. There was a fireplace in the living room, a couple of old couches, and a small kitchen with the essentials. A simple place, but I liked it. It felt homey and comfortable. I grabbed a blanket and curled up on the couch, letting the crackling fire keep me warm as I read a book, the hours slipping away unnoticed. Later that evening, as the darkness of the forest surrounded the cabin, I decided to make myself a quick dinner. The wind outside had picked up, rattling the trees and causing the occasional branch to scratch against the windows. I thought nothing of it, just another evening in the woods. My aunt had warned me about the wildlife before. Bears, deer, even the occasional cougar, but they never ventured near the cabin during the warmer months, she assured me. After dinner, I washed up and turned off the lights. The cabin was completely dark except for the orange glow of the fire in the living room, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I closed the curtains, tucked myself into bed, and tried to fall asleep. The wind outside howled, and the sound of it pressing against the cabin made the silence feel more intense, like the world beyond was holding its breath. I woke up in the middle of the night to a loud noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe a branch hitting the roof, but the noise came again, followed by a scraping sound. My heart began to race as I lay still in the darkness, listening. It wasn't just wind or a branch. It was something heavier, something that didn't belong. The noise was coming from the kitchen. I swallowed hard, my mind trying to piece together what could be happening. I slowly sat up in bed, my eyes straining to adjust to the darkness. My phone was on the nightstand, but I didn't want to risk making a noise by reaching for it. The wind outside had picked up again, but I could still hear the strange sounds. Scraping, shuffling, the faint creaking of wood as if something large was moving around. It didn't take long for me to realize what was going on. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't a person. It was the unmistakable sound of something large, something with weight, moving through the cabin. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I thought of the wildlife my aunt had warned me about. Could it be a bear? I took a deep breath and slowly reached for the lamp on the nightstand. My hands shook as I clicked it on. The soft light illuminated the room, but I didn't feel any safer. The scraping noises grew louder, followed by the sound of something heavy pushing against the kitchen door. My heart thudded in my chest as I pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to steady my breathing. There was no way I was going out there to investigate. I told myself I needed to stay calm. Bears weren't known to break into homes, right? Maybe it was just a bear sniffing around outside. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of claws scraping against wood, followed by a low, guttural growl. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just sniffing around. It was in the cabin. It was inside. I wanted to run, but the thought of leaving the safety of my room and heading into the kitchen or front door was terrifying. My mind raced through every possible scenario. If it was a bear, it was likely looking for food. There was a window in the kitchen, but it was too small for a bear to fit through. The cabin had a solid door and a window by the front, but what if the bear got in through another way? Suddenly, there was another loud noise. This time it was a crash, followed by a sharp splintering sound. The bear had knocked something over, probably a table or chair. I could hear it rummaging through the kitchen, knocking things around as if it were searching for food. My breath was shallow, and I fought to keep my panic in check. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't call anyone. There was no signal out here, and even if there was, the nearest help would be over an hour away. The only option I had was to stay quiet and wait it out. I pressed my back into the wall, praying the bear would lose interest and leave. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I could hear the bear snuffling, growling softly as it pawed through the kitchen. It was so close now, and I was starting to fear that it might be heading toward my bedroom. Every small noise made me flinch. My fingers were numb from gripping the edge of the bed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the bear stop moving. The silence was unbearable. My heart was racing, but I dared not make a sound. Then, in the dead of night, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing. Deep, labored breaths from something large, heavy. The bear was just outside the bedroom door. I couldn't stay in bed forever. I had to make a decision. I thought of the kitchen, the fireplace tools, something to defend myself with. But the thought of moving felt impossible. Every instinct in me screamed to stay still, to remain quiet. Then, something unexpected happened. The bear snorted softly and backed away from the door. I held my breath, waiting, but the sound of its movement grew more distant. It was leaving. Slowly, I allowed myself to relax. The scraping noise I had heard earlier had faded into the distance, replaced by the normal sounds of the wind outside. I didn't move for several more minutes, listening intently to ensure the bear was truly gone. Finally, I took a deep breath, pulled myself out of bed, and crept to the door. My legs felt weak beneath me, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I peered out into the dark hallway. The kitchen was eerily quiet, and there was no sign of the bear. I tiptoed toward the window, trying not to make any noise. The moonlight outside was bright enough that I could make out the dark shape of the woods surrounding the cabin. But there was no sign of the bear. I carefully opened the door and stepped into the hallway, my heart still racing. The kitchen was a mess. Cans had been knocked off the shelves, and the refrigerator door was wide open. It was clear the bear had been searching for food, but thankfully, it hadn't found anything it could carry off. I didn't stay inside much longer. With the first sign of daylight, I packed up my things as quickly as I could and left the cabin. The woods had been beautiful, serene in the daylight, but the night's terror had left me shaken. As I walked away, I looked back at the cabin one last time. The wind had died down, and the only sound now was the soft rustling of the trees. I never returned to that cabin. Couldn't. The memory of that night, the growls, the crashing, the feeling of being trapped in that tiny room while something so much bigger roamed just outside, stayed with me. But I was lucky. I'd escaped without any harm. The bear had moved on, and I had learned something about the dangers of the wilderness that night, about the creatures out there, and about the unpredictable terror that can find its way to your doorstep. That was the last time I ever stayed alone in the woods. The cabin was tucked away in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't far from the nearest town, but far enough that you couldn't rely on anyone hearing you if things went wrong. I had rented it out for the weekend, hoping for a quiet retreat. Just me, the isolation, and the woods. But something was off from the very start. The first night, I felt uneasy. I chalked it up to the usual first night jitters. The floorboards creaked under my weight. The wind howled outside, and the dark seemed thicker than usual. The isolation had a way of making every little sound seem amplified. Still, I brushed it off and went to bed early, knowing that the next day would bring relaxation. Around midnight, I woke up with a start. The silence was deafening. I lay still, straining to hear something. Anything. It wasn't the usual house sounds that I had grown accustomed to. It felt like something wasn't right. My heart began to race. I heard a faint rustling sound outside the cabin, almost like footsteps on the dry leaves. I couldn't just ignore it. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. An animal, a person, something else, but I had to check. Slowly, I got up, trying to make as little noise as possible. My hands trembled as I pulled on a jacket, my breath shallow. I peered through the small gap in the curtains, but there was nothing there. No movement, no figure in sight. The woods beyond the cabin were still, just dark shapes against the sky. It must have been my imagination, I thought. Still, I locked the windows and doors, the heavy feeling in my stomach not quite letting me rest. But I did fall back asleep eventually. The next day, I brushed it off. I spent the day walking around the property, enjoying the woods, the peace. It felt good to be away from everything, the noise, the crowds, the stress. The air was clean, and the quiet was soothing. But as the sun began to set, I noticed something. The cabin wasn't as secure as I'd thought. There were spots along the perimeter where the wood was chipped, places where the lock seemed off. I hadn't noticed it before, but it was enough to make me wonder if I'd been too careless. That night, as I lay in bed, the unease crept back. The wind had picked up, the branches scratching at the windows. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard the unmistakable sound of something outside. A low thud, followed by the distinct noise of a footstep on the gravel just outside my door. I froze. The hairs on my neck stood up. I lay there listening. There were no more footsteps, but the feeling of being watched crept in. The quiet that followed was suffocating. My mind raced. Could someone be out there? Was I overthinking it again? But then the unmistakable sound of a hand scraping against the cabin door broke through the silence. I bolted upright. My heart was hammering in my chest. Whoever it was, they were right outside. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and turned off the screen's bright light. My fingers shook as I dialed the number of the nearest town's sheriff's office. But the call wouldn't go through. I was too far out for service. Panic settled in. There were no other houses for miles. No one would hear me if something went wrong. I slowly crept toward the front door, peeking through the curtains. There was a shadow by the porch, and I could barely make out a figure. A man standing still. My mind raced. What did he want? Why was he there? I didn't know if I should confront him or call for help, but I was trapped. The closest town was too far away, and the roads were bad at night. The man didn't move. I had to make a decision quickly. He could be armed, he could be dangerous, and I had no way of knowing his intentions. With a deep breath, I grabbed the nearest heavy object I could find, a lamp, and turned off the lights, trying to make myself blend into the darkness. I heard him shuffle a bit closer. The door rattled as he pushed on it, testing the lock. I gripped the lamp tightly, my knuckles white. The man was trying to break in. I was caught in a panic, torn between fleeing and defending myself. If I ran, I might not make it far. And if I confronted him, I had no idea what he would do. I wasn't prepared for any of this. Then he started talking. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but the words were clear. I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need to get inside. It hit me. This wasn't some random intruder. He was desperate, but desperate people could be dangerous. I just need to stay the night, he continued, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and frustration. I'll leave in the morning, I promise. I won't do anything. Just let me in. I didn't respond. The truth was, I was terrified. My mind raced through every scenario. Could he be the owner? Was this his cabin? It didn't make sense. I'd rented it, and I hadn't been told anything about meeting the owner or sharing the space. I stayed silent, weighing my options. The man continued to speak in low tones, his words pleading now, but there was something unsettling about his tone. I could tell he was lying or at least hiding something. His hand gripped the door handle once more, and I heard a faint scraping noise. He was trying to force it open. That's when I knew I couldn't stay hidden. I had to do something. I picked up the lamp and moved silently toward the back window. I knew the area around the cabin was dense with trees, so if I could slip out and make it to the woods, I might be able to hide long enough to think. I reached for the window lock, but just as I was about to open it, the door burst open with a loud crash. He'd gotten inside. Panic surged through me, but instinct took over. I rushed out the back, keeping low, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't dare look back. My shoes crunched on the dry leaves as I ran toward the tree line. I was fast, too fast for him to catch me. I ran deeper into the woods, knowing I couldn't stop until I was sure he wasn't following. My legs burned, but I couldn't slow down. Eventually, I found a small clearing and collapsed, gasping for air. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea what I was running from. Who was that man? Why had he come? It wasn't until the sun came up that I felt it was safe enough to make my way back. I cautiously approached the cabin, staying low, expecting the worst. But when I reached the porch, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The door was wide open. I stepped inside, moving cautiously. There was no sign of the man, but the place looked like it had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out. It was clear someone had been searching for something. I found a wallet on the floor, partially buried beneath the debris. It was the man's. I opened it carefully. The ID inside confirmed it, the cabin's owner. But there was something else that didn't sit right. His ID showed a different address, one in another state. Had he been planning to come back here? Or had he been watching me all along? I didn't stick around to find out. I left the cabin and called the sheriff's office once I had service. They came to investigate, but by then, there was nothing to be found. The man had vanished. It wasn't until later, when I had left the area and was back in town, that I realized the full truth. That man wasn't just the owner. He was living a double life. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood just how lucky I had been. It wasn't the ending I expected. I thought it would be something simple, a creepy guy trying to break in. But it turned out to be so much more. The cabin wasn't just a place to escape to. It was a trap, and I had narrowly escaped being caught in it. The worst part? I'm still not sure if he was ever planning to leave. I've never been the type of person who enjoys being far away from civilization. The idea of isolation always made me uneasy, but when my friends suggested renting a cabin for a weekend getaway, I couldn't say no. It seemed like the perfect chance to unwind and get away from the grind, even though something deep inside me felt off about it from the start. I ignored that feeling, thinking it was just nerves. The cabin was located up in the woods, a couple of hours outside the city. We'd seen it on Airbnb, a charming little place that looked like it belonged in some old movie about escaping to the country. It was just the kind of rustic setting we all thought would be fun, with a wide porch, tall trees surrounding it, and the promise of total peace and quiet. I don't know why I didn't immediately feel comfortable with it, but maybe it was the pictures. Something about the place felt too perfect, too staged. As we drove up the long, winding dirt road leading to the cabin, I noticed the trees growing denser with every passing mile. The kind of trees that look like they're crowding the road, their branches stretching down and almost touching the car as we passed. The deeper we went into the woods, the more it felt like we were entering a completely different world. A world where everything was untouched, where we were the only people in existence. When we finally reached the cabin, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you hear when you're sitting by a lake or in a field. It was a heavy silence, a quiet that made the air feel thick. Even though it was early afternoon, the place felt dim, like the sunlight couldn't quite break through the dense canopy of trees. The cabin itself looked just like the pictures. Old, with a wooden exterior that had aged well with time. The windows were large, letting in natural light, and there was a porch that wrapped around the front. The kind of place that seemed designed for a weekend retreat, a place to get away from it all. But the feeling in the pit of my stomach grew heavier as I stepped out of the car. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was just tired. We got out and started unloading the car. My friends were excited, chatting and laughing, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. There was an odd stillness in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind us, but there was nothing. Once we were inside, I was relieved to find that it wasn't as creepy as I thought it might be. The interior was cozy, with wooden beams overhead and a stone fireplace in the corner. The furniture was old but comfortable, and there was a big kitchen in the back. The place had a homely feel, which made it easier to relax, even if I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that had settled in the back of my mind. That evening, after settling in, we made dinner and spent time hanging out. The conversations flowed easily, the fire crackling in the background. I tried to push the uneasy feeling away, telling myself it was just the unfamiliarity of being so far out in the woods. But as the night wore on, something about the cabin still didn't sit right with me. Around 9 p.m., we decided to head outside to sit on the porch and enjoy the night air. The stars were bright above us, and the silence was almost suffocating. No wind, no animal noises, just stillness. It was unsettling. I had been outside plenty of times in the woods before, but it always felt like there was life around. Tonight, it felt empty. I tried to start a conversation to distract myself from the tension in the air, but it didn't work. No one else seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary, and we all went to bed a few hours later. The night passed without incident, but I woke up at around 3 a.m. with an uncomfortable feeling in my chest. I couldn't sleep, so I got up and decided to grab a glass of water. The house was silent, almost too silent. As I passed through the living room, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. I froze. I was sure I had locked it before going to bed, but now it was open just enough for a sliver of moonlight to filter in. My heart started to race. I walked cautiously toward the door, checking the windows as I went. Everything seemed normal, but my gut told me something wasn't right. I stepped out onto the porch, looking around. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches creaking in the wind. But there was no sound from the woods. No animals, no rustling leaves. Nothing. I stood there for a few moments, my mind racing, trying to reason with myself. Maybe one of my friends had opened the door and forgot to close it, or maybe it was the wind. But something inside me couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there, watching. I quickly shut the door, locked it, and went back to bed. I tried to sleep, but the unease lingered, gnawing at me. I told myself it was just my imagination, nothing more. The morning came, and the others were up early, laughing and joking around like nothing had happened. I didn't tell them about the door. They would have thought I was overreacting. The next day, we decided to explore the area. We hiked up a trail behind the cabin, the kind of trail that led deeper into the woods. I kept looking over my shoulder, still feeling like something wasn't right, but I kept it to myself. When we reached a clearing, we stopped to take in the view. From here, the cabin looked tiny, nestled among the trees. It was peaceful, but the silence still weighed on me. That evening, as the sun set, the tension returned. We were inside, playing cards, when I heard a sound outside. It was faint, but distinct. A soft thud, followed by the rustling of leaves. I stood up, straining to listen. It sounded like someone was walking around the cabin, but I couldn't be sure. I mentioned it to my friends, but they just shrugged it off, attributing it to the wind or some animal. But I wasn't convinced. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate. Couldn't sleep that night. I stayed up, sitting in the dark, watching the trees outside through the window. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the forest was pitch black. Every now and then, I thought I saw a shadow move past the window, but when I checked, nothing was there. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong with the cabin. Something was wrong with the woods. I didn't know what it was, but I knew we weren't alone. It was getting worse. I could feel it in my bones. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I went outside to check the locks one last time. I was sure the door was closed, but when I went to the front porch, I saw it again. The door was slightly ajar. I froze. This time, I didn't go inside. I just stood there, staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I heard the sound again. This time, it wasn't in the distance. It was right behind me, footsteps crunching the leaves on the ground. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, the dark, and the heavy silence that had been hanging over us for days. I didn't go back to bed. I stayed awake, pacing the cabin, listening for any sign that I wasn't alone. But it wasn't until morning that I found out the truth. The door wasn't the only thing left open. There were other signs hidden in plain sight. Things were moved around inside. Not much, but just enough to make me question if I had imagined it all, or if something else had been inside the cabin with us. We packed up and left that morning, heading back to the city without a second thought. The feeling of relief when we finally got out of the woods was overwhelming. I'll never forget that cabin. Never again. I don't know what was going on there. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. but I'll never feel the same about staying in the woods again. The cabin sat there, half buried in the trees, like it had always been. I wasn't sure why I chose to go out here. Maybe it was the isolation, the stillness of it all, or the fact that I needed to get away from everything. Just a few days of quiet, no distractions. The place seemed harmless enough, old but sturdy. I parked my car at the edge of the woods and grabbed my pack, hiking in the last mile with nothing but the sound of my boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The air had that crisp autumn bite to it, the kind that makes you feel alive but also uneasy, like something's about to happen. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I arrived, casting long shadows that stretched across the cabin's weathered porch. A layer of dust and cobwebs covered the door, but the place still looked like it could hold up if a storm hit. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The inside was basic, wooden floors, a small kitchen area with a rusty stove, and an old couch that smelled faintly of mildew. It wasn't much, but it was enough for what I needed. I set up my things, threw a couple of logs in the fireplace, and started a fire to keep the chill at bay. The warmth quickly filled the small space, making it feel cozier, more like home. As the night crept on, I settled into the couch, the sound of the fire crackling and popping, my mind drifting. I wasn't expecting company. The closest town was miles away, and the road leading up here was barely a dirt path, let alone something people would just stumble upon. That's when I heard it. A noise, a snap of twigs outside. It was faint, but it was enough to make my head jerk up. I froze, listening. The wind? No, it was something else. A soft shuffle, like footsteps moving slowly, deliberately. I stood up, grabbed the flashlight from my pack, and stepped cautiously to the window, peeking through the curtains. Nothing, just the moonlight filtering through the trees, casting shadows that danced like specters on the ground. I breathed a sigh of relief, probably just a deer or some other animal. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt thicker now, like it had weight to it. The stillness outside, so complete, was broken only by the occasional snap of a branch. I stood there for what felt like forever, straining to hear any more sounds. And then it came. A shadow moved past the window, quick and low to the ground. I recoiled, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, who could be out there? I didn't know anyone within miles of here. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but something about the movement made my skin crawl. I backed away from the window and quietly moved toward the front door, my hand hovering over the old doorknob. Should I check it out, or was that a mistake? I decided against it, locking the door for good measure. The feeling of being watched lingered. I went to the back window, trying to peer through the dark. No sign of movement, nothing out of place. I tried to push down the rising panic, telling myself it was just the isolation getting to me. But then I saw him. In the corner of my vision, just past the trees, there was a man standing. His back was turned, but I could make out the shape of him, tall and thin. His clothes were tattered, blending with the dark woods. What stood out, though, was what he was holding. Something in his hand, glinting in the faint light. A shard of glass. The sharp edges caught the reflection of the firelight in a way that made me sick to my stomach. I watched him for a few seconds, my heart hammering in my chest. Was he staring at me? No, he didn't seem to notice me, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. His movements were slow, almost methodical, like he had all the time in the world. I backed away from the window and pressed myself against the wall, breathing quietly, trying to keep my panic in check. What should I do? He wasn't just some lost traveler. There was something off about him, something that told me I was in danger. I grabbed my phone, dead. Of course, the battery had been shot for days. I needed to think. My first instinct was to grab something for protection, but I couldn't find anything in the cabin that seemed useful. A kitchen knife? Maybe, but it was small, and the man outside had something far more dangerous. I had to be smart. Couldn't panic. I couldn't let him hear me moving around. I crept to the back of the cabin, the door that led out to the woods, my only possible escape route. I moved quietly, trying not to make a sound, and reached for the door handle. Creaked. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. I glanced back, but the man hadn't heard it. He was still standing there, motionless. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me with as little noise as possible. The night air was cold, sharper than I expected, biting into my skin as I crouched low. The man was only a few yards away, just outside the line of trees, his back to me. I could barely make out his features in the dark, but I could see enough. His thin, scraggly hair, his hunched shoulders, his deliberate steps. I started to move cautiously, staying low to the ground. The crackling of dry leaves under my feet was the last sound I needed to make. I had to stay silent. My only goal was to get to the road, to get far away from whatever this was before it was too late. I rounded the corner of the cabin, but then the ground beneath me gave way. My foot slipped and I fell, landing hard on the ground. The man turned instantly. He saw me. Panic surged through my body. I scrambled to get up, but before I could move, I heard him. His voice was low, guttural, barely a whisper. "Don't run." My body froze. I didn't know what to do. His presence felt like a weight on my chest, like he was sucking all the air out of the night. I could see him now fully. His face was gaunt, hollowed out, like he hadn't eaten in weeks. The shard of glass was held loosely in his hand, the sharp end pointing down, but the look in his eyes, it was cold, calculating, like he knew what he was doing. I tried to move again, my instincts screaming at me to get away, but my legs felt like lead. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but my brain kept telling me to stay still, to wait for the right moment. The man took a step toward me. I could hear the crunch of his boots on the forest floor, the slow, deliberate rhythm of his movements. There was no urgency, no rush. It was like he knew he had control, and that thought terrified me. "Please, just let me go," I whispered, my voice shaking. The words didn't feel real. I wasn't sure if I even believed them myself. His eyes flicked to the side, and for a moment, I thought he was going to strike, that the glass would come down on me in an instant. But instead, he paused. His expression shifted, something like recognition crossing his face, followed by a faint flicker of confusion. He seemed almost hesitant, like he didn't know what to do with me. I took my chance. I darted to the side, rolling into the bushes, my heart racing in my chest. I heard him curse under his breath, then a quick shuffle of feet behind me. I pushed myself harder, faster, moving through the underbrush with every ounce of energy I had. The sound of him following was close now, too close. I didn't dare look back. I just kept running. The road wasn't far now, just a few more yards, and if I could reach it, I could find help. But something was wrong. His steps were getting louder. I was close, but so was he. I reached the road, my legs screaming from the effort. I stumbled out onto it, barely keeping my balance. My eyes darted around, looking for any sign of a car, any sign of someone who could help me. But the road was empty. Then I heard the man's voice again, faint now, trailing off into the distance. He wasn't following anymore. I didn't know if he had lost interest or if he had given up, but he was gone. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest town. By then, my body was sore, my mind in a haze, but I didn't care. I'd made it out. I was safe. I couldn't shake the image of the man, though. I didn't know who he was or why he was out there, but I couldn't risk staying to find out. I've always been a fan of getting away from it all, the constant buzz of city life driving me to seek out solitude. This time, I decided to rent a small cabin deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest neighbor. It was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, a time to get away from the noise, to think clearly. The cabin was simple, rustic, the kind of place you'd imagine being tucked away in a forgotten corner of the world. It was wooden, with thick logs making up the walls, and the smell of pine and earth lingered in the air. The nearest town was a good hour's drive away, so when I arrived, I felt like I had entered a different world, one where no one could find me. The cabin had a small porch, a rocking chair that creaked softly when the wind blew, and a view of the dense forest surrounding it. The sun was setting as I arrived, casting a soft orange glow over the trees, making everything look peaceful. The only sound I could hear was the chirping of birds and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. I set my bags down, took a deep breath, and thought to myself how nice it would be to spend a few quiet days here, just unwinding and clearing my mind. As I unpacked, I didn't notice anything unusual. The place felt old, sure, but there was nothing about it that screamed danger or discomfort. It was just a cabin in the woods, and that was exactly what I needed. By the time I had everything settled, the sky had darkened, and the forest around me had become a sea of shadows. I lit a few candles inside the cabin to give it some warmth. The smell of burning wax mixed with the earthy scent of the forest outside. I made myself some dinner, a simple meal, and ate it slowly, savoring the quiet. It wasn't until after dinner, when the dark had fully settled over the land, that things started to feel off. I was sitting on the porch, the rocking chair creaking gently as I stared into the dark trees. There was no moon, and the sky was a thick black canvas above me. The forest felt alive, the sounds of animals and insects filling the air. But then, I heard something else. A soft shuffle, a rustling sound coming from the trees just beyond my cabin. At first, I thought it was just a deer or some other animal moving around, but the sound was too deliberate, too close. My heart started to race, and I sat up straighter, trying to peer into the darkness. I listened intently, straining to hear more, but it was dead quiet again. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me. After all, being in such an isolated place for the first time could mess with your head. I shrugged it off and went inside, locking the door behind me. The walls of the cabin were thick, but something about that night felt different. The silence outside seemed too complete, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. I tried to distract myself by reading, but every few pages, I'd glance up at the window, checking the darkness outside. Nothing seemed to be there, but then I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. A figure, a man, standing just beyond the edge of the porch, partially hidden by the trees. I froze. My heart nearly stopped in my chest as I stared at him, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. His face was pale, almost ghostly under the faint light from the cabin, and his clothes were dark, ragged. But the most unsettling thing was his stillness. He wasn't moving, wasn't even looking at the cabin. He was just standing there as though waiting. I quickly stood up, my knees weak, my breath shallow. I peeked through the window, but the man was gone. I thought about grabbing my phone, but I realized there was no signal here, no way to call for help. I was truly alone. The night seemed to stretch on forever as I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the trees, had me on edge. I kept the lights on, trying to drown out the fear with the flickering glow. When morning came, the sky was a pale gray, the light filtering through the trees in a way that didn't feel comforting. I went outside, telling myself that the man was just someone passing through, someone who had been lost in the woods and didn't mean any harm. But there was no trace of him, No footprints, no signs that anyone had been near my cabin. The day passed uneventfully, but as night fell again, the dread crept back. I sat on the porch again, listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to shake off the unease that lingered. And then, just like the night before, I heard it again, the soft shuffle of footsteps. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. I didn't want to look, didn't want to know if he was back. But something in me urged me to look, to confirm what I already feared. There he was, standing just beyond the porch again, this time closer, so close that I could see his face more clearly. His skin was ashen, his eyes hollow, as if he hadn't slept in days. His expression was unreadable, almost like he was lost in thought. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but I knew it would do no good. My legs felt weak, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, not moving, not speaking. The silence was suffocating. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and disappeared into the trees, his footsteps fading into the distance. I didn't know what to do. Should I leave? Should I stay and wait? My instincts told me to run, to get out of there, but I had no idea where I would go. It was too dark to drive, and the nearest town was far away. Plus, I didn't want to look like I was overreacting, so I stayed. But I didn't sleep. The next day, I packed my bags. I was done with the cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for something. As I loaded my car, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder toward the trees, half expecting to see him again. But the forest was still silent. It wasn't until I was halfway back down the narrow road leading from the cabin that I saw it. A small, weathered piece of paper stuck to my windshield. I got out and peeled it off, unfolding it slowly. There were no words, just a crude drawing of a man standing in the woods, eyes wide and hollow, watching. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That was the moment I realized I had never been alone.